So today, recording has started. Today we have a special strategic roundtable discussion, which is also our sixth Mekong Tourism Advisory Group meeting. So as you know, we have basically these meetings structured in a way that we rotate between country updates and then strategic roundtables. So this is the second roundtable. Last week we had one with Anna Pollock, and today we have Professor Jeffrey Lipman, who is the former Deputy Secretary General of the UNWTO and the former CEO of the World Travel Tourism Council and former Executive Director of IATA. So a lot of experience when it comes, especially when the public sector, but also private sector, and now having founded an organization called SunX, which is focused on climate-friendly travel. Jeffrey organized a leaders symposium in Malta last February, end of February, which is kind of like was the last trip many of us took that joined this, and people from all over the world joined this meeting to talk about climate change in tourism, and really I think the true leaders in this topic were there, so it was quite inspiring. Out of this meeting, Jeffrey and I, who've known each other now for I think over 12 years, have discussed a potential partnership that we just signed actually a few days ago, to have a memorandum of understanding between the Mekong Tourism Coordinating Office and SunX to move forward with climate-friendly travel. And Jeffrey will talk more about this agreement and what we're planning to do, and how this all also integrates into the current COVID-19 situation, as we're looking to kind of resume travel and help struggling businesses. Climate change, especially in this region, I think is a very important issue that we need to take seriously. So before I hand it over to Jeffrey, I'd like to play a quick video, and then after that we'll start the discussion. We don't have any PowerPoint slides this time, and I think we have a great group of now 14 people, so I think this will be very interactive, and I think also we'll get some good action steps out of this as well. So let me just share this video. 1 second.
The climate crisis remains unchanged by COVID-19. It is existential. The 2015 Paris Agreement says everyone must dramatically reduce carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions towards zero by 2050. Starting now, travel and tourism is a tenth of the world economy. With a seriously growing carbon footprint, we are threatening the lives of our kids and grandkids unless we bend this trend. At SunX Malta, we believe we can do this with climate-friendly travel. 1. Lowering our carbon footprint. 2. Growing green through the Sustainable Development Goals. 3. Tying ourselves to the Paris 1.5-degree climate neutral targets. We have introduced 5 support tools to help companies and communities bend the trend. First, a registry of climate neutral ambitions to serve as a strategic discipline and visibility vehicle. Second, a database of good practice to provide inspiration. Third, online support for transformation. Fourth, a new diploma in climate-friendly travel for next-generation leaders. Fifth, visibility and green marketing through SDG 17 partners. So why don't you work with us at SunX Malta to bend the trend together? Just go to www.thesunprogram.com and let's get started.
Good. Great. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeffrey to lead the discussion. Jeffrey, you have to unmute yourself quickly. You're still muted. Let me see if I can.
How's that?
Now it works. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Jens, and good afternoon to everybody, except for David. Good morning. He's just got out of bed. Firstly, thank you, Jens, and thank you for the Mekong Tourism Coordinating Office. I've had a good and long relationship with your office, Jens, and with some of the people on this call during my UNWTO days. And I want to say how full of admiration I am for the way that you have built this into one of the pillars of the international travel and tourism community. And in a time when getting messages across is kind of drowned out by the sheer volume and avalanche of webinars I read the other day, I think you've managed to keep a terrific focus on the Mekong region. We made that video partly because of this avalanche of information. How can you get quick messages across on complicated subjects to people with busy lives who are being pulled in every direction and then suddenly slammed against a wall with a virus which everybody is a pundit on and nobody has the slightest idea how it's going to develop? And we wanted in this very small NGO which I run with the support of the government of Malta and the Minister of Tourism of Malta, we wanted to remind people that as bad as the COVID-19 crisis is, and we all know it is really bad, the climate crisis hasn't gone away, and the consequences of this will be, unfortunately, even worse if our society as a whole hasn't found a way to respond to this. So the challenge is how to get a message like that across whilst people are wondering if they're going to have jobs next week. And I think there are three urgent issues that I'd like to discuss today. One, the fact that climate change is existential. People say that, but they don't stop and think what that means. It means that all of our grandkids are destined to freeze or to fry if we don't fix it. And we don't know which it is, wherever you are in the world, because the changing weather patterns are still being evaluated, a little bit like the impact of COVID-19 is still being evaluated whilst you have to respond to it. So that's the first message. Climate change is existential. The second message is that our sector, travel and tourism, is behind the societal response curve. We have to change that now. In whatever reset the C-19 crisis will shape, and there are 100 webinars on that a week, we have to make sure that we include the response in a very visible way to the climate crisis, because that is not going to go away. And the third message is at SunX Malta, we've developed a no-cost climate-friendly travel system that we believe can help companies and communities to build their own response according to their own circumstance. So what I'd like to do in the next 10 minutes or so is just to underpin those 3 points, and they're the 3 things that I'd like to leave you with after this presentation. 99% of the world's scientists believe that climate change is real and will put an end to humanity if we don't get a coordinated global response to it. All governments agree with this, except, of course, for the government of Donald Trump, and he doesn't agree with anybody about anything except himself. And what does it mean? In simple terms, all the things that we've taken as predictable about our weather patterns as we've been developing travel and tourism are no longer the case. It means more frequent extremes, more savage storms, more serious floods and droughts, all unpredictable. And in turn, this means habitat destruction, agricultural devastation, and large-scale migration. It's happening now, and it's happening in your region. Last night, after talking to Jens, I Googled the climate impacts in the Mekong region, and you should do this yourself to see that this is very real and it will impact on your tourism strategies. The second point, our sector is behind the response curve. The Paris Agreement of 2015, which everybody on this call knows about, was the culmination of 50 years of debate. And Jing, you will remember in 2007 in UNWTO in Davos, we held a worldwide debate on climate response. 650 people, the first time the World Economic Forum had ever allowed Davos to be used by another organization for this purpose. And we developed, as all meetings do, a set of responses, and nobody is following them. Nobody. It's set in place what I'll call a structured, progressive, multi-decade response to take carbon and other greenhouse gases out of our socio-economic systems. And let me say, I looked at the records in the recent weeks. All of the Mekong states are fully on board with this objective. All of your national governments have filed formal plans. They're called nationally determined contributions to become climate neutral. That's the buzzword. It means to be net zero carbon by 2050. And it's like many such international agreements, it has progressive reduction. 40% by 2030 in many cases, another 40% by 2040. But this isn't just an academic writing a paper or a debate at a webinar. Every year, your governments file a paper with the UN Climate Agency, and that paper becomes the hallmark for national legislation, national regulations, policies, and the policies are directly applicable to the plans and to the activity of travel and tourism. They affect parks, they affect city space, they affect transport. And I believe that for the most part, whilst everybody on this call kind of knows this is happening, very few of your strategies have built a response in to your nationally determined contribution. We talk about these issues, we do not engage. Why? It's not our ministry. It's not the usual people we're dealing with. There's no legislation yet, or it's so far into the future that we can't deal with it against the priorities that we have every day. But as we saw with C-19, you don't have time to respond to this once something happens. When the sea level rises and the Mekong River is affected, every one of your tourism plans is going to be torn apart unless you start to build this factor in, and not just at the policy level, but at the day-to-day practical level of even the smallest company. Because as we've seen with C-19, when the crisis strikes and the tourists stop, the entire structure comes tumbling down. And we know this is going to happen with climate change. Our governments have made commitments on it, and I would argue it's incumbent on smart people in the travel and tourism sector to find ways to build this in to the strategic plans you are making, and to build it in a meaningful way, not just as another sentence in a policy document, another PR initiative, but to build it into the evolving structures of hospitality, of transport, of travel services, and to do this in a smart, clever way. And I would put it to you that the famous C-19 reset, which everybody is talking about, gives an opportunity to build this into place by saying that in the future we will strive to have climate-friendly travel. And this takes me to my third and last point. What do I mean by climate-friendly travel? And what are we doing at SunX Malta to work with organizations like the Mekong Tourism Coordinating Office and with friends like Jens to try to put it on your radar screen? I think above all, climate-friendly travel is a mindset. It's to explore 3 specific issues. Number 1, how to continually look for low-carbon ways of doing business, energy efficiency, new energy initiatives, electric transportation, all of these things which people speak about at conferences. These have to become the new way of doing business, and they have to be built into strategic plans. The second issue is to actively link tourism activities to the specific SDGs that are most relevant for you. And it really does boil down to what's relevant for you. I used to work with a guy years ago when I was at IATA, and he used to say, everybody is me-shaped. There are 17 SDGs, 169 targets, 200 plus indicators. You have to have teams of people, small teams, dedicated, smart, research-oriented people who look at your tourism product and say, which are the ones which are most relevant for us? And how can we bring them into place in an evolving, non-disruptive fashion? So that's the second element, SDG linked. And the third element is tied to the Paris 1.5 climate reduction trajectory. I won't bore you with what that means, but basically it means that the world agrees to keep the temperature more or less to 1.5 degrees above what it was at the start of this century. And we have to build that linkage with the national climate reduction strategies of each and every country. So how do we do this? Well, the rest of society has for the past 3 years been creating carbon reduction plans and filing them on a registry which is held by the UN Climate Agency. And we have negotiated an arrangement that we will produce now a registry for travel and tourism. And we will launch this registry in the middle of next month. And we're doing this work with WTTC because WTTC and Gloria Guevara have taken a strong policy position on climate change. And we have an SDG 17 agreement with them that we will provide a practical underpinning to this policy agreement. So the first step of that practical underpinning is a very simple online register of a carbon reduction plan. And I won't bore you on this call. Everybody will have a different approach to measuring how much carbon they are using and to structuring a long-term reduction of it. The plans will not have to be very accurate to begin with, but they have to be systematic so that the organization that you're involved with gets used to doing the plans, just like it gets used to doing budgets, taxes, and other things that we all have to do in our lives, and like going on a diet. We know that if we want to achieve something at a certain moment in the future, we have to program it into our daily activities. And we'll help if people need support for these plans. We've actually hired someone whose job it is to simply support people who are looking to see how they can best do a plan. And then we suggest you charge some young, bright people to take ownership of this plan with top management oversight. The young people think differently than we do. They're the activists. They're the people who support Greta Thunberg. They support the flight shame movement. And because they understand that we have to make these changes if they're to have a chance to thrive in the world that they live in. And then engage with us to see how you can build this strategy into your social responsibility and visibility programs. Again, with the Ministry of Tourism in Malta and the Institute for Tourism Studies to help people to take operational advantage of the fact that you are looking to be climate friendly in your travel systems. We've started a diploma this year in October, an online diploma for graduates to familiarize themselves with all of the principles of climate friendly travel to help companies and communities in their transformation. And we've set a target of 100,000 young people by 2030 who are thinking climate-friendly travel as the only basic option. And last but not least, work with us through the Mekong Tourism Coordinating Office to make the Mekong the world's first climate-friendly travel region. You have one of the most beautiful regions to protect, and this is the opportunity to do it. So with that, Jens, I'll stop. I hope I've made my points clearly enough, and I'm happy to engage in a discussion on these issues.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. So maybe I think from my point, I think we're very pleased, obviously, to partnering with you and your organization to see how we can push this forward. Anyone who is listening to the UN Global Compact Leaders Summit, which is going on right now, which doesn't really have a tourism focus, but will see that climate change throughout the UN system actually has an extremely high priority. And their speakers, last night Al Gore, today before this call, Ban Ki-moon, later on Angela Merkel from Germany. So I mean, there are top leaders from the public and the private sector, and the SDGs, climate change, and so on are always coming up. How are they intertwined with this current COVID pandemic? And also, as Jeffrey just mentioned, if you do some Google searches around climate change in the Mekong region, you will see that there are already reports out there, some of them already 10 years old, that outline what will happen to this region. And this region is obviously very, very fragile when it comes to climate change issues, and will be, very much affected. So I mean, we see that as a priority, as this office, and we're looking to engage with the public and the private sector. So with that, maybe I want to open it up to some discussion and some questions. I know we have a very nice group of around 17 people now that have joined us. So maybe if anyone has a thought or a question or something to contribute, we'll open it up. I think on the David Robinson. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. Very interesting discussion. I promote one particular area of the Mekong, specifically the Chao Phraya River in Bangkok, so quite small compared to bigger interests. And I'm working on two specific projects regarding environment. One is brewery waste hydrogen energy, and the other is electric vehicles, e-mobility. And what I'm finding is that, of course, any project, no matter how small, and these are small projects, requires a multitude of sort of stakeholders. So in my discussions with Thailand's largest brewer, there is an interest in powering their trucks with hydrogen, but the government hasn't created a framework that would incentivize moving to that technology. So whether you're looking large or whether you're looking small, we're putting a solar farm on the top of a building on the river, and that will charge potentially the motorbike taxis, but also the express boats on the river. So these are small ways to improve the environment, and they're not going to change the world. But every step requires some sort of form of public-private collaboration. So my question is, what do you do when you've got a good idea, but you can't mobilize government change?
Jeffrey?
Well, I don't have, David, first of all, I'm delighted to hear the kind of things you're doing, because I think you're in the forefront of something which is going to grow quite dramatically. I think the problem with pioneers is you're out there ahead of the pack, and all too often getting government support, particularly at the present time, when all the support is focused on COVID-19, is very, very difficult. And I'll give you an example. When I was at the WTTC, I was the first employee of the WTTC, first president, and we introduced a green program that some of you may have heard of called Green Globe. And my then chairman, who was the chairman of American Express worldwide, said, it's a great program, but it's 15 years ahead of its time, so you will not get the support for it. And of course, he was a wise man, and he was very right. But I don't think that should stop one believing that one's right and going down the right track. And on a practical basis, I think that there are funding mechanisms which are emerging outside our normal radar screen, mostly coming from climate and environment agencies, but they're coming for just the kind of programs that you've been that you identified, David. And I, my only, I've got as much advice as anybody else on this call. My advice is that I'm sure you're in the right direction. I'm sure it's the right thing to do. And I'm sure that if you keep at it, you will find funding emerging and you will become a pioneer in those areas, particularly the waste to energy. There are a lot of new programs, including for aviation fuel, which are starting, where household waste is being taken and used for energy. I saw another one with palm oil husks the other day. So I think the general direction that you've identified is the right direction.
Great, thank you for the question, David. Anybody else? Maybe I'll pick on someone because I mean we have Peter Wiesner on the call as well, who has a lot of he's advisor to the CEO of Bangkok Airways and used to be with Bangkok Airways, many other airlines in the region. So I think obviously when it comes to climate change and so on, everyone is first pointing at the airlines. So I'm sure Peter has an opinion or at least a thought to this discussion, and I'm sure if it wasn't close to his heart, he wouldn't join this call. And being from Switzerland and having grown up in the mountains and nature, I'm sure that climate change is something that's important. So not to put you on the spot, but I'll do it anyhow, Peter. I hope you forgive me. But I'd love to hear your thought, and maybe you have an opinion as well, how we could look at climate change in this region. You have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Is it okay?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. You do put me on the spot, Jens, but you're forgiven. Climate change and aviation, of course, is a very critical issue. And a lot of people criticize and take aviation as the bad boy of the climate change. It is true that the aviation has increased tremendously in the last 10 years, but it's also true that the CO2 emission is approximately 2%. There are sectors in the world that generate much more CO2 than aviation is. Now, with the wealth and the ability to travel, and we've seen that in 2019, the average person wants to go on vacation 2 or 3 times a year. They want to go overseas. They want to fly for 12 or 15 hours, discover new countries, new environments, new places, which of course by itself, it's a very good thing. Now, we at Bangkok Airways have since many, many years been aware and conscious of the climate changes. Our trams that carry the people from the plane to the terminal in Samui have been running on electricity for the past, I think, nearly 20 years, right? We are separating the waste on the plane. We are separating it in our offices. We are trying to save fuel. We're trying to use, and if we have to use it, trying to use environmental friendly material. I've been instrumental and said every time I fly, I look at the menu, the way it is presented. Can't we get rid of this plastic? Can't we do this? Can't we do that? And slowly but surely, things fall in place. Now, of course, the hotels do the same. And as Jeffrey said, small bits and small things will help. The aviation also is developing new engines. The new planes, compared to the old ones, are using 25% less fuel. Now, 25% less fuel is A, a monetary situation, it's a saving, and B, it is helping the environment tremendously. So the idea is, of course, within IATA that by 2050 or something like that, we're climate neutral. Now, engines to develop these things, of course, take a long time. You can't do it overnight, and it is a huge financial investment. And the price goes up. Airlines are trying to change the old planes into the new one. Now, today, the fuel price is very low. And with COVID-19, of course, all the airlines are going to keep the old planes because financially we are not in a position to change them. But I'm sure that the part on aviation, every airline has an interest to be on good terms with the environment. Yes, we pollute, but then again, trucks that drive around the countries are polluting as well, and you need the food and you need the material to be carried. What else is there to say? And of course, without aviation, a lot of small places in the Mekong area would not have developed the way they are today. And I just want to cite one example, Luang Prabang. I was the one who said to my boss, I said, we should fly there. And I was there without international flights. I came down from Shanghai, down the Mekong in 2 days, and was enchanted by this place. But the hotels in the rainy season closed down. All the staff are sacked, right? They had no work and nothing. So I said, well, if we want to do something, we have to start flying. And we have to bring people in and keep the hotels full, or at least fill them a little bit. The first year, we flew 4 flights a week, and that goes back 17, 18 years, 15 perhaps. And we lost a lot of money. Then the rainy season came, we lost even more money. And then the dry season came again, and then it was okay. We went to 7 flights, and we kept on going for 7 flights. And all the hotels were open, the restaurants were open, things. There's also a contribution of aviation that can contribute to the well-being of the local people in the Mekong area. And we've done that, of course, with other successes, with Siem Reap to a certain extent. Bangkok Air was one of the first international carriers going there. And in Myanmar, we play our part as well. I would like to fly to different destinations, but for the time being, we can't. So aviation and environment go hand in hand. We try to do our best to live up to the expectations, but it's a teamwork. Tour operators, hotels, governments have to work for it as well. Right, Jeffrey?
Well, absolutely, Peter. I just have two comments.
Yes.
I'm a pro-aviation person, having spent the first 20 years of my working life with IATA, and believing that organization does terrific things. The first point I would make is that the danger of the current aviation position is that 2% is predicted to increase to a substantially higher proportion of the total pollution over the next 20, 30 years. And the main reason, and it's a reason adopted, accepted within IATA, is that there is no synthetic aviation fuel which will not produce carbon. And my own position on that, which I've publicly expressed to airline chief executives, presidents, is that we need to have a collective travel and tourism moonshot approach to get the big oil companies to produce much more of the synthetic aviation fuels that they're starting to produce. There have been almost 200,000 flights in the past 3 years using at least 50% of synthetic fuel. And the IATA position is to say, well, we can't guarantee we'll have the supply, and we can't guarantee we'll have it at the same price as fossil fuel-based aviation fuel. And I think they will have to change that position, because in the end, they won't be able to use a price differentiation. If it's more expensive, put it in the fares. The fares will have to bear the cost of polluting and of protection against pollution. And then the other point that I want to make is, it's true IATA is talking about climate neutral, but its 2050 ambition is to be producing half of the pollution that it produced in 2005. And in my mind, that is far too conservative a position for an industry as dynamic and as technologically advanced as aviation to take. That aviation must and will have to evolve. I'm sure of it, has always done so, and has always played, as you described, Peter, a leading role in opening up travel and tourism destinations. But I do think there's going to have to be some serious rethinking of the overall position. And I'll make one last point. As a result of work by the aviation community, in the beginning of the next year, there will come into place a global plan to charge passengers for the carbon that is being used on the flights they take. And this, I think, is a good thing. And I think it will help to generalize the idea that we need to have climate-friendly travel, because all the passengers will be getting messages and will have to actually pay to offset the carbon pollution that they're creating. I'll stop there.
Jens, I've got a question just on the carbon offsetting point, if I may.
Who is this?
Yeah, sorry, it's Bertie. Can you hear me?
Yeah, if you can quickly introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name's Bertie. I'm the Managing Director of Sampan Travel in Myanmar. Thank you, Jeffrey, for speaking. Very interesting presentation. Just my question was an open question on that point of carbon offsetting. At Sampan, for a couple of years now, we have carbon offsetted all our domestic flights within Myanmar. We don't arrange international flights. That cost is itemized, and guests can choose to withdraw from it, but if they don't, that money is then put towards climate schemes within Myanmar. We raise quite a lot of money from that, and it feels good, and I guess usually feel good about it. But I know that some organisations are actually quite anti-carbon offsetting. For example, I think responsibletravel.org in the UK, campaign against doing that, as they believe it kind of gives a sort of get out of jail free card to travellers and tour operators to fly as much as possible, and actually doesn't help the issue. And I wondered what the other people in the meeting think about that, and whether they think carbon offsetting is a good thing, or actually it's a sort of a cheat where you can kind of feel like you're doing a good thing, but actually you're not really helping you're not really solving the problem. That's the open question.
Jeffrey, you want to?
Yeah, Jens, you may recall when we had our think tank in Malta, there was a very healthy discussion on the points that Bertie's raised, and the discussion was quite divisive. Some of the people who were involved with responsible travel in the international field did put forward the view that Bertie expressed. And it's a legitimate view. You don't take the carbon out of the atmosphere. You pay somebody else for their activity so that you can continue to pollute. But in terms of a gradual progression and an increasing awareness, and of actually funneling money to some good, often community-based projects which are doing things which are carbon responsible, I think it's a good solution. Winston Churchill used to say that democracy is the worst form of government known to mankind, except for every other form of government known to mankind. And I think carbon offsetting falls into that realm. It sensitizes people to the issue, it forces people to pay for their pollution, and it makes the companies who are organizing the offsets understand that they have some responsibilities in this field.
Good no. Thank you. Thanks, Birdie, for the question. And I do remember Malta. I learned a lot, from hearing the pros and cons from both sides. But I do agree with Jeffrey that I think, while it's not perfect, it is something that raises awareness and stuff. I wanted to go back to David Robinson, who spoke earlier. David has another question. David?
Yeah, thank you. Interesting, going back to your introduction, Jeffrey, on the link between the amount of travel and its importance to the economy. And of course, we need to be doing something for the environment, but there's always the second track of worrying about the economy as well. I read today that the Thai government is looking at which countries it creates a travel bubble with. And the first country off their tongues was China. And when you think about travel with China, you think of large volume, but low expenditure. And I just wondered, in sort of running these two thoughts together, is this an opportunity to rethink high volume travel that will actually benefit the environment as well? So rather, Thai government for a while has had a quantity over quality strategy in pushing numbers by millions each year. Should governments be looking at less? And if they are looking at less, will they be able to maintain a tourism economy without having a huge drop?
That's a hell of a question. In academic principle, and I think the minister will probably empathize with this, it's easy to say you should switch to a lower volume, higher value strategy. The challenge is that you have a system which has been built up over many years on exactly the opposite principle. And even if you have a strategy change, it's going to take some time to bring that into force. And my own view is it's a good strategy to look at lowering the rate of expansion, capacity management to use the word that the experts use, but actually to make it happen requires enormous changes and disequilibrium of existing players who are as COVID-19 has shown. You plan for a 4% per annum increase in volume, and suddenly you find that you've got a 20% decrease. That is how crises force you to make the changes. So I believe that what's missing sometimes from the good strategic thoughts is a really effective system of implementing that kind of a change. Adjust to the new kind of environment. How do you?
But isn't now the right time to do it? I mean, if ever there was a time to make a change on strategy, it is now, when tourism is going to be lower and you can build back a different model.
If you take strategy in its true sense, David, I would agree. And that true sense is to say that by 2030, this is how our tourism will evolve, including the measurements. I mean, part of being able to measure your carbon is to measure the full impact of what your tourism is. For years, we've only measured the numbers and the environment side. And by the way, there's plenty of good research now which would allow tourism people to create coherence with their tourism satellite accounts. It just hasn't been strategy. You need to also have real life programs that help that strategy to materialize. And all too often, the markets don't get controlled. Markets have their own evolution.
Good. Thank you, David. I wanted to actually ask maybe Ju Jing, former director of the Asia Pacific program for the UNWTO, maybe to comment on this too, because Ju Jing has been working with many governments over the year, and everyone is talking about, more yield, more high quality, and we don't want any more mass group tours, especially from China and so on. But I think it doesn't matter where they come from. I think mass group tours from Germany are just the same. But I think, as Jeffrey said, and I agree with that, I mean, it's easy for us to say, yes, we're going to reset tourism in the Mekong region or anywhere else. It's a great opportunity, and I agree with that. But sometimes there just are other factors in play as well. I mean, there are people that make money, not by yield, but by heads. It doesn't matter if I go and I'm a backpacker and Jeffrey goes as a millionaire. In the end, it's the same visa fee. So I wanted to ask Ju Jing maybe to comment on that and see, countries that actually started to implement something like that. I mean, I used to work for the Canadian Tourism Commission. And actually, on the China strategy, we did implement a strategy similar to New Zealand and Australia to kind of cut these $0 tours, and there was an increase in yield. But on the Asia Pacific level, maybe Ju Jing, you probably have an opinion on, and also maybe some good case studies where people have failed and why, and some countries that have succeeded.
Just before Su Jing speaks, could I just make it clear Jeffrey is not a millionaire?
Thank you, Jens. Jeffrey is not a millionaire, but Jeffrey is certainly one of the greatest thinkers in tourism that I have ever met in all my career life. And if Jeffrey, relating to the David question, says it was a hell lot of a question, then I don't think me being a practitioner more would have a better answer. But since Jens, as always, pinpointed me, so let me see if I can just share some thought on this issue. Yes, indeed, if you look at the Chinese traffic into Thailand, it's a huge volume. It's a huge volume, I think around the number of 11 million year on year. To have a strategic change of high yield and lower volume indeed will be a challenge. But on the other hand, if you look at different destinations, the way they penetrated the Chinese market, you would find actually there are several types of different penetration skills. For instance, in the case of the Maldives, when they switched to Asia, especially after the tsunami, They at the beginning also look at some of the sort of lower end of the Chinese market, and it didn't work because no one at that time could afford the Maldivian product. And at the end, if you look at the composition of the source markets of the Maldives, Chinese is equally taking a huge percentage, is somewhere around 20% of the entire arrivals into the Maldives. And you look at the average room rate over there, anything would be above 1,000 US dollars per room per night. So from that angle, it has already proven that if you are penetrating the right market in China, you will get the high yield market. But probably the starting point for destinations like Thailand, they didn't start it from the right angle. Therefore, I see that there are chances to change that particular strategy. And more than anything else, today I think we have a better chance to switch our strategies into a higher yield market, because it is no longer that only we wanted to convert these people and to change the whole concept. It is now, especially I think after the C-19, from the demand side, the tourists would demand more climate-friendly travel. This is fundamentally different, and we have a much better chance as compared with the past. I don't know whether this general comment would help. Thank you.
Thank you, Jing. And maybe to stay on this discussion, because I think it is quite relevant, I wanted to maybe put the former Minister of Hotels and Tourism, Myanmar, also on the spot, and I hope he'll forgive me as well, to see, how, in his time, when Myanmar actually opened up for tourism, and obviously China became a relevant market, how Myanmar maybe has built a strategy, or maybe Myanmar made some mistakes when looking at the market. Excellency, you can unmute yourself first.
Can you hear?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, James. I don't want to say about the past, it was already finished. But what was done is done. So, I don't think I didn't make any mistake in that time, because, what we need is the volume. The first thing is, if you get more from any destination, then we will go step by steps to get the potential visitors, especially for yield management. So this is what we need to get the good potential buyers from the world. So one thing is, geographically speaking, we are in the two giants. One is China and the other one is India. But we can get more potential tourists from China, because we do have a good relationships, but China is more, because the border areas, from the border areas, we can get a lot of potential. This is one thing. And we don't forget about other neighbors, especially Thailand. Thailand is also very friendly to Myanmar. That's why we want to get more from Thailand, because at that time, I wanted to set up the policy like 2 countries, 1 destinations program with Thailand. So this is what I did it. That's why we get many, because, the 2 borders with China and Thailand, there are many borders we can open it up. from there, we get many say tourists from these areas. So that is what we do it. But at the same time, I have to be adopted the master plan for long-term development in a sustainable and responsible manner. That's why when we came into GMS since 1995, we always concentrate on tourism, regional development in a sustainable and responsible manner. So these are the things that I have always considered, always focus on get the potential development of the industry. So now today, you all are just discussing about C90 with preventive measures. But at the same time, we want to develop tourism. At the same time, we want to develop tourism in a few years. So the thing is, for Myanmar, what I already explained to the member state in our last meeting. We have to be focused on the domestic area first, then we can extend to our neighbors like that. So if we can get more from the neighboring countries, our volume will be growth. And the tourism, in terms of tourism point of view, our status will be in a good position. Because tourism has a ripple effect, that's why. So if you get whatever the tourists can spend, a lot or spend a little penny, no problem. The thing is, first, we open the country. But at the same time, we have to be careful of the spread of the disease. So these are the things, that's why what we need is when you develop tourism, what the most important thing is the coordination of the not only the government, public, private, and the people also, because they will be suffering if we do any mistakes like that. That's why what I need is the coordination of the 3P, public, private, and people living in the destination. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Jeffrey,
yes, if I may make
please.
One comment on what the minister said. I had the pleasure and the privilege of working closely with the minister as he opened up, as he led the opening up of Myanmar. And I just want to say that his commitment to a balanced kind of tourism, where sustainability was always, from a policy perspective, identified as a given. I don't think I've seen a better example of a ministry leading the opening of a market than that one, and particularly in really tough geopolitical circumstances. It was done quite brilliantly, including the engagement of the World Economic Forum at the final stages to kind of test the strategy against the sort of people who would be visiting, whether as leisure tourists or even more importantly, as business tourists. And you did a hell of a job, Minister. That's all I can say.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Good. Do we have any other comments or questions? Maybe then I'll put someone on the spot again. The minister just mentioned the importance of people, and we have a couple organizations on this call that actually are working, at the local level. So obviously we can look at policy level and government level. That's one side, but I think, since we have the benefit of having people on this call that work at a very local level, I wanted to kind of get maybe some thoughts around it. On one hand, we have Janina on the call who works in Laos with the wildlife conservation, and obviously climate change is something that has a big impact. And on the other hand, we have Osman also on the call who is working at Fair Cambodian Circus, which is a social enterprise that helps kids get trained to have a career in the art and performing at the circus. So maybe, I don't know, would be great to hear from both of them. I know there's a few other organizations on here as well. There's another training restaurant in Bagan, a Sanon restaurant, which is also on the call, also helping kids to get trained in the food and beverage industry. So I think, if any of these three maybe have some comments, more looking at the local level when we look at this issue of, let's say, resetting tourism and how COVID and climate change actually play a role when we're looking to rebuild tourism post-COVID-19. Maybe I'll ask Janina first, if Janina has a comment or a thought. Nina's still on the call. Actually, I don't, must have left. Then maybe I go to Osman. You can unmute yourself first. Maybe give a 30-second introduction of what you do.
Sure. Thank you, Jens. Yes, I'm based actually in Battambang, where the school is, where the training is done of the students that eventually perform at our social enterprise in Siem Reap, conducting daily shows pre-COVID time. And the school's been here 25 years in training youth in the arts with the idea of, partly developing the art sector and at the same time providing employment. Most of the employment, though, is directly linked to tourism. So the shows that we perform on our campus or in Siem Reap, they're mostly for the foreign tourists. And of course, COVID, the situation has made a huge impact on us. We've had to close the shows, but even if you're allowed to open, the local market is very, very small. We realize that most of the cultural activities are driven by the tourism market, by the tourists. And they are the ones that will pay the $14, $20, $18 to watch a show. The locals, one can't afford that. And if we, but also their interest is not in that, even if we do provide them special prices of as low as $2 a ticket. So reviving, we need to reinvent ourselves, see, next couple of years, without these tourists coming in, how are we going to change our model in bringing arts to the people and having them value it? That value of even if it's Cambodian art and culture is not the same as a tourist sees it or as a foreigner sees it. So that is one area that we need to address. Coming to climate change and the carbon footprint impact, I mean, at a very local level, I think the communities we deal with, their carbon footprint is quite low already, and being a very community-based organization and working directly with all sorts of aspects. But of course, when you look at tourists coming in, they do, the carbon footprint around that. And for us, I think mitigating those impacts will be a challenge, and in the sense of trying to find a framework that would be able, so that we could be part of that, what do you call, zero impact or climate impact travel program. If we can bring in more local tourists, and of course their impact in that is lower anyway. But we have those challenges I explained in that area. Yeah.
Thank you, Osman. Jeffrey, any comments or thoughts?
No, I'm not. The only point I would make is that as we develop the climate-friendly travel system out of Malta, we will have an online best practice case study, which I think could be helpful to small organizations like Osman's, and there is, as I said, it's not an expensive program to enroll in. It's a self-disciplining activity which can only be helpful as you're developing your activities. Even from a promotional viewpoint, I think eventually tourists are going to be looking for establishments which are following this kind of a pattern. I think this was always the argument for the green certification programs, and I think the climate programs will be even more vivid because the consequences of climate change will become increasingly apparent and present. So even though you have a small organization, Osman, we'd be delighted to see you trying to put a plan together, and we'd be really happy to work with you to help you do it.
Thank you, and I think you're right. This is the right time to do that because we have several months before we'd be able to open up again, and we are trying, at least on the programming side, to reinvent ourselves and building into that the no-cost climate travel and using a model around that will be. I think it's a good time to do that. So thank you.
Yeah, so Jeffrey, as you know, I mean, we have created this what we call the Experience Mekong Collection, which is an alliance of these small businesses and social enterprises where Osman's organization Fair Cambodian Circus and Sanon Restaurant in Bagan and other ones are part of. So this is one of our priority programs, and I think could be quite interesting to see how the Experience Mekong Collection could benefit from our agreement with the climate-friendly travel as well.
Absolutely, and Jens, you and I both know at the end of the day, it's this kind of experience which is making the difference for the tourists, which is making them appreciate what is being offered at the local level. So, you know, I reiterate, we'd be delighted to work with you and to see, you know, what are the challenges in putting a carbon plan together for a small business and helping you to do it, as I say.
Good. Any other comments? We're a little bit over an hour now. We can go a little bit longer, but I mean, just wanted to check in if there's any other comments or questions. One? If not, then maybe I think it's a perfect time to maybe close this call. I think this was also a nice closing statement from you, Jeffrey, you know, to see how we can now collaborate, you know, not only at the government level, but also at the real local level with the social enterprises that we have, you know, put together. I mean, I think this is almost, you know, if you look at, you know, the long tail, I mean, I think now we have almost a force of these small social enterprises that create a social impact together. And we have also, you know, calls and what came out of this, and we've done actually just a recent survey. One of the findings was, and we're just analyzing still the survey, but was that a lot of these businesses appreciate this alliance because they can cross-promote each other, they can learn from each other, they can connect and share ideas, and together as a consortia, there's also a certain trust level around it. And, you know, as people are starting to resume travel sooner or later, we know all it will happen. Maybe it will happen slightly different, who knows? But I think purposeful travel will become more and more important. So I think businesses that either have a social impact or protect the environment, protect wildlife, protect children, and all of that, I think will rank higher, you know, and I think this could be interesting to work with you, Jeffrey, to see how we can build this brand of the Experience Mekong collection or just Experience Mekong as a whole, as we have done so far, but then also put some tangible pieces behind it instead of just the collection of social enterprises, but then also putting requirements in place what these businesses have to fulfill to stay in the collection as well.
Yeah, I mean, from my viewpoint, Jens, count me in, and I can see that on the call, my friend and colleague Ollie Wheatcroft is here. And as you know, Jens, I do the talking and Ollie makes it happen. So, you're plugged in now, Ollie, to everybody who is here. And let's see if we can't make this enterprise group something which is standing out in this area.
Great.
Excellent. I look forward to that.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Ollie. So with that, we're I think ready to close the call unless we have any other thoughts. I know we have a few people on the call that have a lot of experience and haven't spoken yet. I see Dorchichie there, working with a lot of local businesses in Myanmar and has been instrumental in building responsible tourism in Myanmar. I don't know, Dorchichie, do you have any other thoughts before we close the call? You have to unmute yourself first.
Thank you, Jens. And also to the others as well. It's always very nice when we have this virtual meeting and led by, of course, the Mekong Tourism Advisory Group. I really appreciate that. I really look forward to it every week. I like that question which David Robinson raised as, what do you do when you cannot do or when you cannot mobilize change? Here, I will just restate it like that. What do we do when we want to mobilize change? You see, and we have this agreement now, and I look forward that this agreement can benefit the private sector, especially the multiple tour operators, the organization set up, how we can work on that. Is my voice heard? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
So, Professor and Jens, of course, we need to work together on a lot of issues, like, for example, the Myanmar Tourism Federation, and we've got 11 associations, and especially with the tour operators, especially with the transportation and the Hotelier Association, for example. This is what I have in mind, is that this is actually the right time that if we want to have this, mobilize change, this is the right time also. And with the roadmap that has been recently launched, if we could incorporate the climate-friendly travel in it, which is still missing. Of course, that's just done up, to overcome the issues of the COVID-19. But as we say, climate change is very vital when we talk about tourism. And I would like a lot of coordination that we can work on, especially for the benefit of the private sector development in Myanmar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chie. Jeffrey, any closing thoughts before we finish this call?
Other than to thank all the participants and to thank you, for having such an activist and collegiate approach on behalf of the region, and to reiterate, we're at the start now of building the climate-friendly travel community. And given the level of understanding, Jens, that you and I have developed over the years, it will be great to make your region, the sort of a leading role in all of this.
Great. Thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you so much for your time and for agreeing to do this. Just to kind of give people a quick forward-looking, so we have our next Mekong Tourism Advisory Group call, which will be a country update on Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. I don't have the date in my head right now, but it's in the online community. And then we have a couple other strategic roundtables coming up. One, which is also someone who was in Malta, invited by Jeffrey at the climate friendly symposium. His name is Ian Yeoman, which is probably one of the top futurists in travel and tourism, and he's going to do a scenario planning analysis. How rebuilding tourism in the Mekong region could look like. So I think this will be very fascinating and something that I think you shouldn't miss. The other thing that we're working on, and I welcome anybody's input on this, is we are working on our virtual Mekong tourism. We are working on our virtual Mekong Tourism Forum, which will be on August 25th, which will be a half-day forum. Actually, the August 25th date was the original date, the third date actually, for the Mekong Tourism Forum in Bagan, which now has been postponed to end of February of 2021. So this is something that I think has a focus on obviously rebuilding tourism in the Mekong region. We are now looking at the content, the topics, and the speakers. I'm talking to UNWTO for a potential partnership on this. So again, it will be a half-day summit, if you so will, very focused. So any ideas that anyone has, we're very welcome to consider those. So with that, I thank you very much. We're now at almost 5:30. Which is within our time. I'll thank everyone for taking the time to join this call, and I hope to see you again. And again, if you haven't joined the online community, I think all of you have. This is where we want to kind of keep the conversation going. So I've reduced the emails already, that as many of you have probably noticed, and I think kind of communicating on this forum is quite efficient. So with that, I wish everyone a good night, a great week, and hopefully we can travel again soon. And some of our members here that are in Bangkok maybe will run into each other over beer sooner or later. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Recording has